Torah portion today is Leviticus 8, and we're not going to talk about it. Other than to remind you that Leviticus 8, Exodus 29 gives the prescription for setting the priests apart. Leviticus 8 is when they did it. And so it describes the week of preparation for the priests to be anointed. And there are many interesting things about it, because they're all anointed with oil, but perhaps the high priest after this, but as far as I know in history, priests were not anointed when they were brought into the priesthood. Now, we do. But there's some interesting things in that. But one of the things that does come out to me in Leviticus 8 is this concept of anointing or calling. And the Bible really, you could almost say it belabors the point. Both Old and New Testament. Make your calling and election sure. Know what you're called to do. Who are you? Do that. In fact, to get outside of your calling, Greg mentions that, I think it's Romans, whosoever knows what to do and doesn't do it is sin. The Bible goes to great lengths to talk about this concept of call. And it's very important to know your call, to be faithful to your call, and sometimes one of the interesting things is we can live our whole life and still be a little unsure what's our call. And for those of us in the house of Levi and Aaron, I thought it's very important for us to understand what's the overall call of Levi. And I talked about that a little last time. And I'm going to shift to the annual Torah cycle today because it kind of goes along with this. The annual Torah cycle today is on Genesis 37, the story of Joseph. And Joseph is an interesting person, and to follow him we get a picture of call. There's also something in Joseph's life which is very pertinent to the role of Levi and Aaron, and that is what you don't do. Have you ever noticed that human beings, we're an eternal contradiction? We want something that we really don't want. If you're a politician, you campaign for change, knowing that as soon as you get in office, the last thing you better do is change because everybody will vote you out. Because they don't want change. They just want to think they want change. And the other thing, everybody wants unity. Until that means getting along with someone that disagrees with them. Then they don't want unity. Their concept of unity is, you see it my way. Once we see it my way, and you'll even see that Christians will do this. The world will be good when you all see it my way. The problem is that's not unity. That's uniformity. And they're different. And the story of Joseph, we're going to take a little bit of time. Joseph is a hero in Scripture. In fact, when you look at Joseph's life, he's this incredible person that goes through unbelievable hardships. His own brothers hate him, sell him into slavery. And they sell him into slavery just because they had a stroke of beneficence and decide not to kill him. Now that really makes you feel good. I'm not dead because my brothers sold me into slavery. Once he's in slavery, he's hired in Potiphar's house, and he gives his life, and he's a very able person. He pours everything into being a good administrator for Potiphar. Potiphar's wife wants him to sleep with her. He won't. And because of his virtue, he goes to jail because she grabs a part of his robe and it says he tried to rape her. So here he is in jail. He's a slave in Egypt because of his brother's hatred. Now he's in the jail as a slave in Egypt because not only of his brother's hatred, but because in trying to do a good thing, it gets turned into a crime. Now he does the good thing of interpreting somebody's dream, and they get restored back to the king, the cupbearer. The baker, of course, wasn't quite as good an end. The loaves being eaten out of his hat. But he says, please remember me to Pharaoh. The guy forgets. Until Pharaoh has a dream, and he remembers, and finally we see Joseph restored. There's something in the story of Joseph that's very important to all of us who have believed in the name of Yeshua and been brought back into Israel by that. Because we are pictures of Joseph. And there's something in his life that tells us why his life followed the trajectory it did. And so, I always ask myself, what was his Achilles heel? Which, of course, is a Hellenistic illusion, but still, you get what it is. What was his weakness? And if you go to Genesis 37:2, we talked a little bit about this before, but it's worth talking about because, Greg was talking about the scripture. You'll know the truth and it will set you free. This is a truth that very few, if any of us, really know inside of us. We struggle with what happens here with Joseph. Genesis 37:2. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. One of the interesting things in this passage is the sages differ on what was the bad report about. Some say, no, this is talking about the sons of Leah who were mistreating the sons of the handmaids. Because when you really read what it says, it just says he brought back a bad report about his brothers. That's not that important, really, who he was talking about, other than this is a whole other subject. They were divided along who was their mother. Civilization today is still divided along who is your mother. Malachi 2 says, have we not all one father? What's the answer to that? Yes, there's one father. And the ultimate reconciliation with Joseph and his brothers is through the bottom. It's when Judah appeals to he is not going home and see what happens to his father. He says, you put me in jail. I'm not doing that to my dad. But Joseph knows he's a changed man. It's a very bad translation to say this was a bad report. It's not a bad report. It is bad slander. What's the difference between... Now, how many of you would say that report is a neutral word?
When you put bad in front of it.
Yeah, but I mean report. What's a report? It's a neutral word. When you put bad in front of a report, it could be that his brothers were misbehaving and he's bringing this record. That the Bible doesn't say that, and this should be changed. The Bible says an evil slander. He brought a message to his father that the intent was to harm. The intent was to defame. This is a word dibah or dibatam, which just refers to the object. Ra'ah. Ra in Hebrew is evil. This says a dibatam ra'ah, a slanderous, evil message. The purpose was to hurt. And this is extremely important because what keeps us as believers divided? We keep up with the bad report. And I'll kind of give away some of what I'm talking about here. Anytime you approach a situation to see how you can find out what's wrong with something so you can bring a bad report, you're acting as Joseph did. And what did this do for Joseph? It set him on a path. Now, Joseph was a precocious man. You know what he goes on? He had these dreams. They were out in the field. The sheaves of his 11 brothers bow to his sheaf. How many of you, if you had that dream, would go tell your brothers?
That's old, Charlie.
I'm thinking, well, of course, my brothers would laugh, so. But you got to put that dream in the context of he has slandered his brothers. And so here he comes along. Not only has he slandered them, but now he's telling them he's going to rule over them. And then he takes it a step further and talks about the dream of the stars and the sun and the moon, and they all bow down to him. The sun and the moon is clear. Jacob figures it out. You're saying not only the brothers, but your mother and I are going to... And so Joseph can seem a little arrogant, too. This word, slander, defame, its original meaning is to whisper. Its original meaning is, it's like a stream that's meandering through the wilderness, just vaguely making a sound. How many of you, anybody here, ever walked into a room and people were whispering, and the minute you walked in, they stopped?
Oh, that's fun.
Was something good being said? No. No, it's not. And that's where I want you to get the full idea of what Joseph was doing, because God called him. There was a call, just as there is on Levi, on Joseph's life. But how many of you know that Joseph had to go through the experience of being sold by his brothers, going to prison unjustly? He had to go through all that before he could be the ruler God called him to be. There was this thing inside of him. And I think Gerald mentioned this once. There's another place that these two words are used together. Only one other place in Scripture. And it is the story of the spies. When the spies go see the land, they bring back what to the children of Israel? They bring back, and my Bible again says they brought back a report. They brought back slander. They went to the land. It was the land God said it was, and they looked for what was bad. They looked with evil intent, and they came back and they said, yep, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. It's a beautiful land like God said, but they're giants, they're walled cities, and we don't want to go there. Let's go back to Egypt. That's slander. And you know in Scripture, the worst thing a person can do is slander their inheritance. There are 100 passages in the Torah that say God gave that land to the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When they saw the land, they brought back a slander. If you go to Numbers 13:32, it uses that word gibah in some form of it 3 times. But one of the places, it actually couples it with ra'ah again, ra. So Numbers 13:32. So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report. This is just about of the land, which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone in spying it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. What is the problem? They're telling the truth. This is what I'm trying to put with this. I want unity. That is something God put inside of my Aaronite heart, to see people get along. You have to get rid of looking for the bad in your opponent. You have to get rid of searching something out to see how it will fail, because that thing inside of you prevents you from ever achieving your goal. Unity comes from looking for the best and forgiving the worst. If that's not how God did it, how many of us would be in the kingdom? Greg, I'm sorry.
I appreciate that. It came to me a little bit different than that. A little bit more at home, and it strikes me a little bit closer. Is that even when you lack confidence in somebody, that's a problem.
It is interesting. Did you hear what Greg said? Even sometimes when you lack confidence in somebody, well, sometimes something in me says, well, my experience with them is they'll fail me. And the problem is that when we put that expectation on people, what happens?
They do it.
Remember Levitical Writings 3:10, to the brethren of Partone, Bishop says, I'm pleading with you to have faith in each other. You read that writing, it brings this out. It's transformational and difficult, because history, and and we'll go on along with that. This isn't to disregard things that need to be corrected. But this is not about correction. This is about looking for what's bad so you can distance yourself from it, which is what Joseph did to his brothers. Did you ever hand up?
Well, just along that, that goes against everything inside of you, because if you goes, well, I've learned this is wisdom, that happened, and I'm not gonna put myself in that position again. I guess, again, just like this morning's discussion, there's everything you have to be connected with your Father, and basically, if you lack confidence in someone, you'd be wise, but is your heart to pray to the Father that, the relationship returned and whatever he has to do with either one, that could be, so there's always that thing.
Well, it is, when you think about it, go back to that scripture Greg brought up. You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. If I'm sitting here worrying about how you're going to mess me up, I'm not free.
Yeah.
And I'm not. Gerald, you had to get that.
Yeah, I don't remember what it says. So quite a while ago, it says, if you can't describe a problem without putting a person's name in it, then that's not the problem.
Good way to put it. And I think, see, when you go down to Numbers 14, I've got some classical allusions here. I love these classical allusions. I love looking at Greek thought, different things. You may not, I do, because it shows you some things. But Numbers 14:36, as for the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, and who returned and made all the congregation grumble against him by bringing out a bad report, this is Dibah again, concerning the land, even those men who brought out, and here at least they make a better job of the translation. They say, the very bad report.
What verse was that, Jim?
That is 37.
George, is it?
14. They brought, and this is the identical words used in the story of Joseph, but they're different forms. Okay? If you were to actually look at an interlinear, this one is Dibat Ra'ah, where the other one is Dibatomic. Don't worry about that. I hardly know what it means. It's just like when we use language, it describes the object, the pronoun, that's all. But it's the same two words. A very bad report, and they all died of a plague before the Lord. And I bring this out because one of the things that I'm seeing, and I'm not free here yet. Greg talked about that. You know the truth, and the truth set you free. I know there's truth in my head to look for the good. There's a wonderful writing, 150, that says, as the light of the seventh day is dawning, there will be a people that will recognize the Messiah in the flesh, which means to look at George, Carrie, and Gerald, and to see Yeshua, to see Jesus. And I'll tell you something, that to believe in people sometimes is what they need to get out of where they're caught. One of the most moving things I know of in my life is at my mom's memorial, when Kimberly got up and read the letter my mom wrote to her, which you may have forgotten, but I never will forget it. Because Kimberly was in a place in her life where she was destroying herself. She was messing around with drugs, she was with the wrong people, everything was going bad. And I don't know if it was her birthday, what was it? Do you know what it was, Sharon?
I can't remember.
Anyway, Mom wrote her a letter. And in this letter, Mom said, I don't understand everything that's going on in your life, but I know who you are. And she went on to say who Kimberly was. She was the child of God, that she had all this potential. Kimberly said, this changed my life. This changed, somebody believed in me. And it's risky to believe in bad people. But believing the bad about bad people, how's that gotten us in 6,000 years? How's that working? Interesting other place where it uses that word dibah is in Proverbs 10, 17, and 18. He is on the path of life who heeds instruction, but he who ignores reproof goes astray. He who conceals hatred has lying lips, and he who spreads slander is a fool. Slander is this dibah. I just want this to be in your mind that the Bible is not giving us a neutral picture. To say that Joseph brought a bad report. All my life I thought Joseph went to his dad and said, your boys are messing up out there. And I knew how that plays in the family. This was a bad thing. What I didn't realize was the scripture was saying he slandered them. And this story is the picture of the whole story of Joseph, the separation, and eventual reconciliation. What brings reconciliation is doing away with the bad report.
So what's the difference? I understand slander is more serious, but, so you can give a bad report even though it's true, it can be slanderous.
Oh, yeah. The difference is, of course, the intent of the bad report is to injure, is to put down. Slander is never neutral. You don't slander someone unless you're trying to defame them. See, in Hebrew, this word divah, defame, is one of the synonyms. Defame, slander, whisper. That's what it means. Now, see, you could bring a bad report. You could say, I went out, checked out this company. They're losing money fast. It's going to go bankrupt in 6 months. Something doesn't change. That's a bad report. But it's the truth, and somebody better pay attention. That's not what happened here.
So then the same report slanderous, how would that go?
Well, no, see, to slander would be to come and bring charges against people. And again, realize slander means you're looking for what's wrong.
Okay. So you're gonna come up and make a report about the same company, and it was a slanderous report. How would that report go?
That would be that you were attacking the character of the people in the company.
Okay, all right.
A story that I love that brings out how the beginning of a story tells us the whole path is the story of Macbeth. And all of you who have watched Macbeth, Shakespeare's not, we give Shakespeare a lot of credit for his ability with the English language, which is unsurpassed. But his ability to read human character is just as great. His plays are great because they're good English, but they're greater because of his ability to see the human heart. And this play of Macbeth starts with Macbeth coming home from a victory. He's been fighting for Duncan, the King of Scotland. And he's walking across the moor, and he's confronted by 3 witches. If you don't remember this, it's just awesome. As a kid, I can still remember that LaRue had this film that was showing it, and I can still remember this mist coming up, and the witches appeared out of the mist. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Hunting through the fog and filthy air. I about jumped out of my skin. I love that kind of stuff, really. It's cool. But anyway, the first witch says to Macbeth, "All hail, Macbeth! Hail to thee, Thane of Glamis." That was it. That's who he was. He was the Thane, or the noble of Glamis. The second witch says, "All hail, Macbeth! Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor." Well, he's not the Thane of Cawdor. What are they talking about? Then the third witch says, "All hail, Macbeth! Thou shalt be king hereafter." And Macbeth is like, "Hey, what's wrong with these guys? I'm the Thane of Glamis." But right as they're going away, a messenger comes up to him and says, "You have been named the Thane of Cawdor." So here's the witch told him he's the Thane of Glamis, which is true. They say that he's going to be the Thane of Cawdor, which comes to pass, and now he's going to be king. What went from something he dismissed found lodging in him. And this suggestion from the witches, of course, this is a masterful biblical morality play that the seed of temptation is planted. Macbeth shares this with his wife. Their ambition grows. They kill King Duncan so that Macbeth can take the throne. And then, to make it, he says that it was the chamberlains, the guards of the king, who killed him. And he kills them, he says, in a fit of righteous anger because of what they had done. And that it's just a bloody trail that ends in him dying. And all the prophecies, all the prophecies that he thought meant he would never die turn out to have little catches in them. He's told that he will not be killed by man of woman born. And that he won't die until Burnham Wood comes to
Dunsinane.
Anyway, and you probably don't care about all this stuff. It's an awesome story. But what happens is he gets in a fight with Macduff, and he's killed all, Macduff's one of his best friends. He killed Macduff's wife and all his kids, trying to get Macduff. is in this fight with Macduff, and he says, I don't have to worry. I cannot be killed by a man and woman born. Macduff says, I'm not a man and woman born. I was from my mother's womb untimely ripped.
Ew.
C-section.
And then all the soldiers cut the woods and burn them, pick them up, and carry them to that. I mean, the whole thing is this picture of you might think you're going to get away with it, but you won't. And this is the result of planting the seed. And all that to tell you, the Bible does this with the story of Joseph. It tells us God has this call on his life, but this thing in Joseph to lift himself up and put other people down, God will deal with it before he puts Joseph on the throne. Did you hear me?
I think I mentioned this before, but one of the most masterful renditions of that play, in my opinion, I went to a Shakespeare festival and saw that. That year, they constructed the set so that every piece that, where he started to crumble, the set would go.
Oh, really? So the set mirrored what was happening?
Yeah, so basically there would be something, he would do something and something would break, and then something would break. And so at the end, the whole set was, and I just thought, it was kind of the character flaws, everything they'll see. That's kind of like for Joseph, you find the things that, what really are the things that are breaking down.
No, and I think, one of the reasons I think this is important is because I think we're Joseph. Even though we're Levi, we're in Joseph. And part of us coming to what God's called us to be is to recognize what happens with this bad report. And I do want to point something else out. I know you guys are really into hearing stories today. But Macbeth is truly a tragedy. Because, see, the story of Joseph isn't a tragedy, is it?
And that's a good end.
Everything that happens in the story of Joseph ends up being for his good. Romans 8:28, for we know that all things work for good to those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. See, when you look at the story of Macbeth, it ends well for the kingdom, for Banquo and for Malcolm, the son of Duncan.
Well,
So
it
in
doesn't
that
really
sense-
end well for Banquo, but for his children it does.
Yes, his children. Yeah, sorry. You gotta be careful, there are people here that know Shakespeare. But I want to point something else out in the story. When God shows us something that needs to be changed in us, it's never to put us down or to destroy us. When we do this to other people, we're not acting like our Father. And I'll go ahead, Joe.
Well, it just reminded me, one of the things I read this morning is that Pope Francis is proposing changing the wording of the Lord's Prayer, where it says, lead us not into temptation, because they dislike the idea that God would be involved in that. And so they're trying to figure out some sort of wording that puts the onus on the devil completely, so that God is never involved in any of our troubles and trials.
Oh, that's kind of inaccurate, isn't it?
Yeah, for me, I translate the Greek words and say, sit there. Yeah, I did see that. But I want to just tell you the story, another Greek story, to show you the difference. And here's the reason I think this is important. Whenever we talk to people, sometimes people's lives seem like an unyielding, horrific tragedy. It is so important for them to know that in the world, they're always, in the theatrical sense, a comedy. Everything works for good. Even if I end up losing my life, God does something good with it. That there's redemption in the Lord. And there's a lot of redemption in the story of Joseph. But I didn't even know the story this well, but I knew it was a stinker. So this is the story of Oedipus. How many of you know this story? Everybody that knows the story, there's a smirk and a gut on their face. But Oedipus was born to King Laius and Queen Jocasta. And Laius had been told a prophecy that his son would kill him. So he left Oedipus to die on a mountainside. However, the baby was found by shepherds and raised by King Polybus and Queen Merope as their own. Oedipus learned from the oracle at Delphi of the prophecy that he would end up killing his father and marrying his mother. But unaware of his true parentage, he believed he was fated to murder his step-parents, Polybus and Merope, so he left for Thebes. The interesting thing about this story is that the prophecies keep coming true, but people are running away from them. It is so antithetical to Scripture. I'd never seen how clearly. You know, there's a passage in Zechariah that says the sons of Zion will conquer the sons of Greece. And of course, it's not talking about Greek people. It's this is a true tragedy. Anyway, so Oedipus, he learns that he's going to kill his father and marry his mother, so he loves his stepmom and dad, who he thinks are his parents. He goes as far away from them as he can. On his way to Thebes, he met an older man and quarreled, and in the quarrel, he kills the stranger. Continuing on to Thebes, he found that the king of the city, Laius, had recently been killed, and that the city was at the mercy of the Sphinx. Oedipus answered the monster's riddle correctly, defeating it and winning the throne of the dead king and the hand in marriage of the king's widow, and unbeknownst to him, his mother, Jocasta. So you see what's happening here? All these prophecies are coming to pass, and everybody, his father, him, they're running away from the prophecy and falling into the hands of the story. Years later, to end the plague on Thebes, Oedipus searched to find who had killed Laius, and discovered that he himself was responsible. Jocasta, upon realizing that she had married both her own son and her husband's murderer, hangs herself. Oedipus then seized 2 pins from her dress and blinds himself with them. Enjoying this one so far? The point of that story is it's a tragedy. Every supernatural word, people are running from it. They're locked into doing it. Do you notice that people here are not free agents? There's no free will here. You can't help yourself. And the end is horrible. Do you ever stop to think that the stories that a civilization has tells you what they really think of life?
Now, which civilization is it?
Well, it's not entirely true, because, I mean, there's always an out. It's always those stories, like if his step-parents had just told him the truth, at the end of the church. Or, I mean, there's always these things where it didn't have to be that way. I mean, Shakespeare
Maybe.
does that too, like in Hamlet.
Yeah.
Hamlet is the son, but, you know, if you had just fixed one thing, and it would have been possible.
That ruins the whole story, though. In any case, the thing I found interesting is that the story of Joseph, those prophetic words, dreams spoken to him, but his life goes on to fulfill those prophecies in a redemptive manner. This story is nothing redemptive about it. And as Teresa says, it's changed. But one of the things that I would like to bring up is I don't think we understand how much our civilization right now is shaped by the bad report. I don't think most of us stop to think that everything we watch, everything we read, is trying to steer us to one side or the other, to look for the worst. And I believe that to be Levites today, to be Aaronites, to be tools in the hands of restoration, we have to actively resist this need to look for the bad in others, and particularly the bad in our opponents. There's no question in the story of Joseph that he goes through being abandoned by his brothers, thrown in the pit, sold into slavery, then put into prison. All these things, God uses these because in a very real sense, Joseph needs to be broken from his belief in his ability. And yet, there's a confidence in Joseph that is never broken. I mean, it's amazing when he is elevated to the position, his administrative skills, his ability to hear the Lord, to interpret dreams. He's an incredible person. But I think all of us here would admit that Joseph was not ready to be second in command of Egypt until the moment God put him in that position. And so there's always this, I guess I can call it a paradox. It's not really a paradox, it's a tension. That you believe that God's got something good to do, but there's a need to wait for it. One of my favorite Psalms, Psalm 27, the Lord is my light, Yahweh is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Do you know how that psalm ends? Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. It's not a passive waiting, but it's something that engages with what's God doing and says, your timing is perfect. Now, there were a couple I had. Gerald, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, I think it's in James. It says, count it all joy when you encounter all of these troubles. And
I tried to remove that verse from my Bible and it just stayed in.
sorry, John, I just won't go there. But recognizing the why. I mean, that's the value of what James has to say, is that there is a purpose to all of these things. Now, you may struggle with believing that, but if you can believe that, then you'll get to see it happen in the way God intended.
And I think that's part of what we want to leave here today, that God has a plan for everyone's life here. In spite of what you might go through, out of it he creates beauty. Out of it he redeems. He's a restoring, redeeming God. I think sometimes we forget that the resurrection has covered all of history. The scripture that says he's the lamb slain before the foundation of the world, there's this resurrection principle in our creation and embodied in him.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I've been through a couple of times in my life where, teaching, which I love to do, it's always very political, and so in a couple of years here and there, in my 32 years teaching or whatever it is, where you get people, because you're kind of sitting there in a fishbowl, so of course, people can just, everything they say that's bad about you is absolutely true. There you are. So, I mean, but at certain points, maybe to make you appreciate the good years, got a couple of people noticing all the bad in you and none of the good or whatever. And so I had a reaction in one situation, Northern California. I thought, okay, I'm going to fix all this stuff. And I had the most uncreative year. It's like, you're trying to fix all this stuff.
You're trying to be somebody you weren't.
And it's a temptation, it's like, okay, I'm going to never have a pile of junk again. I'm never going to,
My wife wishes that was one.
oh yeah, but anyway, so what happens is, you end up not living in your area of blessing and not doing your things you're supposed to do. Not saying you can't improve, but I mean, if you're focusing on all of your faults and trying to fix your faults, then you're not constantly, it's a fine balance, because of course, I always get to be a little neater or whatever, but if that's what you're really focused on and you're worried about it and you're trying to make everybody happy or whatever, you're people-pleasing sort of thing, and then you're not doing some of the things that you're really put here to do. So all your energy's going into that. I don't know if I'm saying it.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult for us to realize that very rarely, in fact, I'm curious if anybody here has an example in your life where you have been angry or upset about a flaw in somebody, and by letting them know you fixed it. I'm just curious, because I've never seen it in 67 years. And the thing is I'll tell you a little story that I've shared with you before, but I see it as so apropos to this. Be careful to not live in negative narratives that teach you to hate people. Right now, in our society, we have a dividing line goes right down the middle of it. You love Trump or you hate Trump. And you have to spend your whole life rehearsing why you hate him or why you love him. And there's nothing that says, you know, maybe there's a middle ground here, I don't know. It's just, and people get used to it. But I've talked to you before about lemmings. How many of you know the story about lemmings?
That's not true.
Lemmings, I mean, whenever you see people doing something thoughtlessly in a group, just, you say, that's like a group of lemmings. And I was taught, this was a biological theory that was supposedly fact, that lemmings in their population will swell to certain proportions, and the way they would handle it is they would mindlessly go off a cliff. And I was so sure this was true. And I couldn't remember why, and so I started researching this. In fact, I was angry when this wasn't true because it was a favorite parable of mine. And so I wondered what happened. And what happened is that lemmings do have, and all animals, anybody here ever noticed our rabbit populations in this valley? How some years you can't avoid them, they're everywhere, then you'll go 2 or 3 years and the population subsides. Well, this happens markedly with lemmings. And somebody had come up with this theory that they just commit acts of mass extinction. It became so believed that when Walt Disney made the film White Wilderness, how many here have seen White Wilderness? If you haven't seen it, that was an awesome film. But in that film, to portray this fact, they get thousands of lemmings and herd them over a cliff.
Did they really?
They did.
Oh my God.
And so this little boy saw those lemmings cartwheeling through the air in agony and fear and terror, thinking they just did this mindlessly. Because that's how the movie portrayed it. And I'm telling you that if you believe something strong enough, you'll start making stuff up. And you do it too.
That makes me feel think less of Walt Disney hurting them.
If that's the only thing you've heard of bad about animals, I suggest you stop researching. The number of horses that got their legs broken, I mean, that's not good. Anyway, the whole point of what I'm telling you is that be careful, because if you believe something long enough and strong enough, you'll start warping reality to fit it. Do you understand the level of hatred between the Catholic Church and the Protestants? It's getting better. The history is full of these kinds of stories that have reality behind them. And another thing I would point out in a bad report: never believe anything that tells you to treat all of a class or a nation or a culture or an ethnos the same, as if they're all the same. Paul makes a statement, and I believe he's got to be trying to be ironic or sarcastic. He says all Cretans are liars. How many of you remember that statement? I'm reading the Bible, I go, what? You know, Paul, we're going to have an argument. But all Cretans aren't liars. Cretans are people. And in trying to put this house back together, in trying to heal Humpty Dumpty, one of the things you have to do is go back and break down the stories. How many of you know, if you want to know the truth about liberals and Hillary Clinton, you probably don't want to consult Rush Limbaugh? Because all Rush Limbaugh sees in life, and he's a smart guy, but he just thinks liberals are stupid. He thinks they're trying to destroy the country. That's slander. I quit listening to it, even when it was factual. And believe me, there are plenty over on the other side doing the same thing. You cannot afford to listen to speech which the design is to teach you to hate, dislike, to put down, to think less of. Doing it will destroy your Levitical heritage. You have to come to the place where you see all of God's people as part of His house. It's expensive, it's hard, you won't like it. There are times you want to not like people. Many times we have plenty of facts on our side. But facts aren't the issue here. Are you trying to build something? Are you trying to heal something? Are you trying to understand someone? I don't always understand what liberals. Sometimes when I try to understand them, I get heartburn. But that's better than rehearsing what's wrong with them. Because the rehearsal of what's wrong with your enemy is going to detract from your ability, your strength to actually bring reconciliation. That's why Levi does not have an inheritance. He doesn't have a territory. He hasn't got a piece of ground he can stand on and say, this is mine. He doesn't, because he can't. He can't do that. And there's so many things I could use as examples here. I'll use a couple. There's something called the blood libel that was used against Jews. And it said that at Passover, the Jews would go find a Christian child and sacrifice them and mix their blood in the matzah. Do you know how many Jews died because of this story? Hundreds of thousands. How many of you, right off the bat when I said it, knew it was not true? How did you know it wasn't true? What do Jews think of human sacrifice? It's part of the reason they can't accept Yeshua. Because we have people thinking that Yeshua's blood was shed on Calvary and went down through a crack in the earth and spilled on the Ark of the Covenant, which is repulsive. Yeshua took his blood where? In the heavens. In any case, the Jews do not believe in human sacrifice. They would never. And yet, because this was believed, at one time around Passover, a little Christian boy was found dead. I don't know, maybe a Jew killed him. We don't know. That part we'll never find out. But because this belief was so intrinsic, it was in the people, it was even in the pagans at the time of Yeshua. The Romans had a story of a man who claimed that he was put in a special room and fed all the best food for a year, and then he found out they were fattening him up for Passover. And I got to tell you, people believe this because they don't know Jews. You believe things about liberals, you believe things about Republicans because you don't know them. You believe things about blacks because you don't know them. Stop it. If you don't know them, then you don't know anything, and don't say it. Find out why liberals believe the things they do. I always wondered why my dad was so intrinsically anti-union. And then, of course, when he told me, when my grandpa, Charlie, he was promoted from foundryman to being a foreman. So, of course, he left the union. They received death threats. The union came after my grandpa. My dad didn't get over that. He was a very even-handed man. Unions are bad. That's just, you have to learn these things. There are good things about unions and bad things. If you don't know that, then you need to take American history. Or the Industrial Revolution in England. And I say this, and I get kind of harsh about it, but let's stop saying things about people we don't know. Find out why they think the things they do. Certainly there are things that are wrong, but when you look at the whole blood libel thing, which was based on the fact they didn't know Jews, another famous one. And I was told to read these when I was a high schooler here by some of our own people who believed them, and that's the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Has anybody ever seen that book? It's a story of how the Jews are conspiring to control the world. The banking system and all the workings. It is one of the pillars of the Islamic world today, along with Mein Kampf, and it was something the Nazis believed. Here's the interesting thing. It's a hoax. It was written in Russia at a time when Jews had no rights, they were living in ghettos, they were dirt poor, but somehow people could believe that they were controlling the world because the Rothschilds were rich. Now, obviously, that means they're corrupt, evil, and controlling the world, right? And what's more, they did the Holocaust to throw the suspicion off of them. Please. Please. And you think I'm making this up. I'm not. I'm telling you what people are saying.
sadly, we have some of this stuff in our own Messianic movement, which I love. I love the idea that the whole Bible means something. That God didn't come along and say, you know what? For 4,000 years, I messed up. Stupid, throw it out, let's start over. I don't care for that dispensational theology. On the other hand, now to go back and assign pagan motives to everything Christians did is the same thing. And here's something. We've still got a couple of minutes. I don't know about Christmas. Jesus probably was not born on December 25th. You don't know that he wasn't, and neither do I. In researching it, probably what happened is they said he died on Passover, and it was believed, because he was Jewish, that Jews die on the day they're born or the day they're conceived. Ultimately, they went with that was the day he was conceived. When did he be born? If he's conceived March 25th, when is he born? December 25th. They could be totally wrong. That's what they thought. They were decidedly anti-Semitic. If you, even by 300, if you check it out, they were doing everything they could not to do what the Jews did. But were they pagans? They were dying because they wouldn't be pagan. Diocletian had just killed thousands of them. And now people come along and say, oh yeah, Christians started Christmas because that's Saturnalia, and that's Mithras, and that's somebody else I've forgotten his blasted name, because of association, because those things were celebrated on that date, or it was around the day of the solstice. All this is just to say, let's not believe the worst. Now we have people spending thousands of hours researching things to see if they can find connections between Christianity and paganism. Why? To help people, to bless people, to heal people, to bring us into a new knowledge of the Messiah? No, it's to put people down. It's not helpful. It's a bad report. It shows definitely that they're Joseph. But Joseph, who God is bringing, and who God is changing. I feel very powerfully and strongly about this. And I end up making everybody mad because I say, those people you don't like, you probably ought to try to get to know them. You probably ought to try to think how they think. And, you know, it doesn't change the fact who I am. I can still remember the people I offended in Baker when I told them I was a hopeless Republican. And I thought it was a joke. But it was true. I'm not voting Democrat. Good heavens. Big like 100 tombstones turning over simultaneously. But we have to be the ability to look for why something actually happened and to actually look for the good. And Cecilia, you brought out a good point. Very often, we want to change somebody to make them comfortable for us, when my concern needs to be, how should George be to glorify God? That might not be exactly what I want. Who needs to change here? You see, and I think this is part of this whole idea of the bad report, the slander. There are things in life that need to be corrected and changed. Very rarely does God put it in your bailiwick, in your purview to fix other people. It's usually about all you can handle. Take care of yourself. The thing that really makes life different is to be able to look around and notice the value of the people, to notice the value of their contribution, and to look for the best. Why did they do this thing? You know, I mentioned the blood libel. There are plenty of other examples where you look at these two pieces of evidence and you think because there's correlation, there's causation. How many of you know that correlation does not equal causation? You have to do the heavy lifting. It's like, for instance, I have cancer and I'm dying. And I hear if I just go on the grape diet, I'll heal my cancer. So I go on the grape diet, I get over my cancer. What am I going to believe? How many of you know it might be right, it might not be? Because I don't know. I'm glad I'm over my cancer. You need to understand this when you try to look at historical events or look at people or even analyzing individuals. That sometimes you see 1 + 1 and you say that's obviously 2. It may not be. You know, it's another thing. I still have many. These kind of things drive me crazy. But now we have this, there's a new blood libel going around, and there have been a fair number of naturopaths and chiropractors that have died in the last 2 or 3 years, some in sort of unusual circumstances. I have a bunch of Facebook friends that say that Big Pharma is doing it. I said, who's Big Pharma? Monsanto. Monsanto is a multi-hundreds of billions of dollars corporation. Do you realize how little they care about that person? I mean, that's not nice, but it is now, when I called somebody out and I said, you know, really, to believe that is to believe such evil intent in people that you don't know. Why don't we just back off of that unless there's evidence? And I was an evil person because I said, we know this. We know that the MDs at Big Pharma are out there trying to destroy naturopaths. They're keeping us from cures for cancer. They're keeping it under. I said, but you know, these people's families get cancer too. If there's a cure out there for cancer, I got a feeling they'd be all for it. But they think I'm hopelessly confused. And maybe I am, but I suspect that believing the best in people is a good idea. It's a scriptural idea. And as we move forward, you know, I love Jeremiah 50, and we'll close with this. God talks about in the day when he brings the family back together, when he brings Joseph and Judah back together, and the whole thing is whole again. It's healthy. He says, search will be made for Judah's guilt, and none will be found. They'll look for Ephraim's culpability. It will be gone. I have a challenge for us. Let's start that. Let's start not looking for what's wrong. Let's look for what's good. Yeah, I do appreciate my mother in this. She had an incredible ability to see what was the best. A couple of times she didn't, but you know, sometimes things are deserved. You know, there's things you can't forget. James and I and Dad and Tim got up to sing Cleanse Me. We cleansed everybody's ear canals. It's kind of funny because Mom is so positive. But Dad couldn't hear very well by then. I'm starting to understand this a little better. And they gave us the pitch. James would not. He stayed on the pitch. Dad got the pitch 2 steps different. And so he was singing the melody, and James was singing the tenor in the right place, but not where Dad was. Tim, he was singing the bass, which had now gotten too low, and he couldn't sing it. He got quieter and quieter, and I was up in the rafters. I couldn't figure. It was pretty bad. I still remember that look on my mother's face, and I thought, oh dear, that could cloud her milk. And afterward, and I don't know if I ever, because this was so rare, that's the worst thing I've ever heard. So occasionally you have to call it the way it is. But seriously, when you look at the history of God's people, of the church of Israel, we have a call, I think, we have a choice. We can be wreckers or we can be builders. And I really especially believe the time we live in now that God's called us to be builders. He's called us to look where the bad report is and give a good report. And if something needs to be corrected, I'm all for that. But if you really want something corrected, you're going to go to the person that can make a difference. I'm not going to talk to Gerald about what Dean needs to do. That's how you can immediately recognize where your motivation is coming from. That's all. Teresa, would you close for us, please?